Case study: Rogers vs. Hosegood 1900. Introduction. In the annals of legal history, Rogers vs. Hosegood 1900 stands as a landmark case that delved into the intricacies of contract law. This case involved two parties, Mr. Rogers and Mr. Hosegood, embroiled in a dispute over the validity of a contract. At its core, the case centered on the interpretation of contractual terms and the obligations they imposed on the parties involved. Background. The factual background of Rogers vs. Hosegood traces back to the late 19th century, a time marked by burgeoning industrialization and economic expansion. Mr. Rogers, a skilled carpenter, entered into an agreement with Mr. Hosegood, a prosperous building contractor, to construct a grand residence in the heart of London. The terms of the contract stipulated the scope of work, the timeline for completion, and the agreed-upon compensation. However, as the project progressed, disagreements arose between the parties regarding the quality of materials used and the adherence to the agreed specifications. These disputes ultimately led to a breakdown in communication and the termination of the contract by Mr. Hosegood. Mr. Rogers, feeling aggrieved by this unilateral action, initiated legal proceedings against Mr. Hosegood, alleging breach of contract and seeking damages for the work already completed. Parties involved. Mr. Rogers, the plaintiff in this case, was a skilled carpenter contracted to undertake construction work for Mr. Hosegood, the defendant, and a prominent building contractor. Both parties had vested interest in the successful completion of the construction project, albeit from different perspectives. Legal issue. The primary legal issue in Rogers vs. Hosegood revolved around the interpretation of the contractual terms and the determination of whether Mr. Hosegood's actions constituted a breach of contract. Specifically, the court needed to ascertain whether Mr. Hosegood had valid grounds for terminating the contract and whether Mr. Rogers was entitled to compensation for the work performed. Procedural history. Before reaching the courts, attempts were made by both parties to resolve their disputes through negotiation and mediation. However, these efforts proved fruitless, prompting Mr. Rogers to file a lawsuit against Mr. Hosegood in the relevant judicial forum. The case proceeded through the stages of pleadings, discovery and PI trial motions before finally being heard by the court. Arguments. In presenting his case, Mr. Rogers argued that he had diligently adhered to the terms of the contract and had performed his duties satisfactorily. He contended that Mr. Hosegood's termination of the contract was unjustified and constituted a breach of their agreement. Mr. Rogers also sought compensation for the labor and materials invested in the project. Conversely, Mr. Hosegood asserted that Mr. Rogers had failed to meet the contractual standards and had deviated from the agreed specifications. He argued that the quality of workmanship was subpar and that he was justified in terminating the contract to protect his interests as the project owner. Court's analysis. In deliberating on the case, the court meticulously examined the terms of the contract and the conduct of both parties throughout the duration of the project. The court scrutinized the evidence presented, including testimonies from witnesses and documentary records of the construction process. The court's analysis focused on determining whether Mr. Rogers had fulfilled his contractual obligations and whether Mr. Hosegood's termination of the contract was warranted under the circumstances. Central to the court's deliberation was the principle of substantial performance, which holds that a party may be entitled to payment if they have substantially fulfilled their contractual duties, notwithstanding minor deviations from the agreed specifications. Decision. After careful consideration, the court rendered its decision in favor of Mr. Rogers, holding that he had substantially performed his obligations under the contract. The court found that any deviations from the specifications were minor in nature and did not warrant the drastic measure of contract termination by Mr. Hosegood. Consequently, Mr. Rogers was awarded damages for the work completed, as well as reimbursement for any expenses incurred in connection with the project. The court's decision underscored the importance of upholding contractual obligations and the principle of substantial performance in contract law. Impact. The decision in Rogers v. Hosegood had significant implications for the field of contract law, establishing precedent regarding the interpretation of contractual terms and the rights of parties in the event of disputes. The case served as a reminder of the importance of clarity and specificity in contract drafting, as well as the need for fairness and equity in contractual relations. Conclusion. In conclusion, Rogers v. Hosegood 1900 stands as a testament to the enduring relevance of contract law principles in regulating commercial transactions and resolving disputes. Through its meticulous analysis and reasoned decision, the court reaffirmed the fundamental principles of contractual obligations and the rights of parties under the law. As such, the case continues to serve as a guiding precedent for future interpretations of contractual disputes, ensuring justice and fairness in the realm of commerce and trade. If you are a law student and looking for more case studies, visit our website www.mylawtutor.net.